What if? The world without Pearl Harbor. It's December 7th, 1941. The world is on the brink of a cataclysmic war, and Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands on the deck of his flagship, ready for the attack that will change history. With 400 planes prepped and primed for the strike, Yamamoto is prepared to launch Japan's assault on Pearl Harbor, aiming to cripple the United States Pacific Fleet and secure Japanese dominance in the Pacific. But then, something unexpected happens. His aide rushes up to him, breathless, with a report. "Sir," the aide says, "we've just received word that President Roosevelt has agreed to lift the oil embargo." Yamamoto stops in his tracks. He thinks for a moment, his mind racing. A subtle shift in the winds of diplomacy. The embargo that had strangled Japan's oil supply and escalated tensions with the United States was on the verge of being lifted. Yamamoto looks around at his fleet, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Well," Yamamoto mutters, almost to himself, "I guess we don't need to do this anymore." But wait. That's not what actually happened. That moment of hesitation on Yamamoto's part, the contemplation of a different future, never came to pass in our timeline. Instead, what happened next is far stranger. December 6th, 1941. The Emperor's Second Thoughts. On December 6th, 1941, just the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor was to unfold, Emperor Hirohito of Japan called Admiral Yamamoto to the imperial palace. The emperor, long revered as a divine figure in Japanese culture, was grappling with the weight of the decision before him. "Yamamoto," Hirohito said gravely, "are you certain this is the right course of action? Are we really prepared to make an enemy of America?" Yamamoto stood still, his mind torn. "Your Majesty, the Americans will eventually enter the war, whether we attack them or not. They've already made their stance clear with the oil embargo. We need to strike first." Hirohito, who had been hearing his general's warmongering for months, still harbored doubts. "But what if they don't? What if we just don't attack them at all?" Yamamoto was silent for a moment. He understood the stakes. His gut told him that war with the United States was inevitable, but Hirohito's question lingered in his mind. "Well, Your Majesty," Yamamoto replied, "that would be a completely different war, and it's one we might not be prepared for." For a moment, the imperial palace was filled with an uneasy silence. Hirohito stared at his most trusted admiral, contemplating a choice that would change the course of history. The next morning, Hirohito woke with a decision in his heart. He would call off the Pearl Harbor attack. The emperor was fed up with the relentless war drums of his generals and wanted to avoid a conflict that would plunge Japan and the world into devastation. He ordered the fleet to retreat. The shockwave, the day the attack was called off. As the Japanese fleet, with its 400 planes, turned around and sailed away from Hawaiian waters, the news reached President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the Oval Office. An aide rushed into the room, breathless. "Mr. President, the Japanese fleet has been spotted retreating from Hawaiian waters," the aide reported. "Retreating?" Roosevelt asked, confused. "Were they ever attacking?" "We're not sure, sir," the aide replied, still processing the reports. "Intelligence suggests they were planning something but called it off at the last minute." Roosevelt stood up, processing the implications. If the attack had been called off, then America was still neutral. He sighed, feeling both relief and unease. "Well," Roosevelt said, trying to sound casual, "I guess we're still neutral then." Meanwhile, in Berlin, Adolf Hitler, who had been eagerly awaiting the chaos that would follow Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, was in a complete meltdown. "What do you mean they didn't attack?" Hitler screamed at his generals. "This was the distraction we needed. America's entry into the war would have kept Britain at bay." "Mein Führer," General Keitel explained nervously, "the Japanese have decided not to provoke America. They're focusing on China. Hitler's face turned red with anger. Without the Americans in the Pacific, they might actually help Britain in Europe. This changes everything. America stays neutral. Germany continues to focus on Russia. Without the attack on Pearl Harbor, America remained firmly neutral for most of 1942. Roosevelt's hands were tied as Congress refused to enter the war unless the U.S. was directly attacked. Britain fought alone against Nazi Germany, while the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the war on the Eastern Front. The situation was dire for both the Allies and the Axis powers, but the absence of America's involvement shifted the balance dramatically. Japan, having avoided the wrath of the United States, redirected its focus entirely on China. With no American Pacific Fleet to worry about, Japan poured all of its resources into mainland Asia. By mid-1942, Japan had conquered most of China, and General Hideki Tojo, now the Prime Minister, was boasting of Japan's success. "See," Tojo said to his staff, "no American interference. We should have listened to the Emperor sooner." But as Japan expanded its reach, it made a fatal mistake. The Japanese Empire, flush with success, grew overconfident and decided to extend its conquests beyond China. They invaded Burma, then India, and even made a push into the Soviet Far East. This expansion stretched Japan's military thin, especially with the pressure of maintaining garrisons in China and Southeast Asia. Stalin faces a two-front war, the decision that doomed Russia. As Japan pushed into Soviet-controlled territory, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin was forced to face a dilemma. Germany in the west was closing in on Moscow, and now Japan in the east was threatening his Pacific coast. Stalin called an emergency meeting with his generals. "We need to make a decision," Stalin said gravely. "Do we fight Germany or do we fight Japan?" General Georgy Zhukov, one of the Soviet Union's most respected commanders, spoke up. "Comrade Stalin, Germany is the bigger threat. We cannot afford to allow the Germans to reach Moscow. But Japan controls our entire Pacific coast," Stalin countered. "If we pull troops from the east, we risk losing it entirely." Stalin ultimately made the worst decision of his life. He pulled half of his Siberian divisions westward to fight the Germans. The result was disastrous. Japan swiftly conquered all of eastern Siberia, and with no American second front to distract them, the Germans were free to focus on the Soviet Union. In January 1943, the Germans took Moscow, and Stalin was forced to retreat to the Ural Mountains. The Soviet Union was effectively split in two: European Russia under German occupation and Siberian Russia fighting for survival. Hitler was ecstatic. "Gentlemen, we have achieved what Napoleon could not. We have conquered Russia," he declared, standing before his generals. The Japanese Empire overextends and faces collapse. By 1943, Japan controlled vast territories across Asia, China, Korea, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, eastern Siberia, and half of India. However, Emperor Hirohito soon faced a difficult question. What exactly was Japan supposed to do with all of this land? "General Tojo," Hirohito asked, "what are we supposed to do with all these millions of people?" "To rule them, Your Majesty," Tojo replied. "We will govern them. But we have only 70 million Japanese citizens, and there are over 800 million people in these territories. How can we manage them all?" "We will figure it out, Your Majesty," Tojo said confidently. But the reality was much more complicated. Japan's empire, vast and overstretched, began to fragment. Rebellions erupted across occupied territories, from India to China, as the oppressed populations began to resist Japanese rule. A Cold War between four superpowers. As the war dragged on, the major powers of the world, Germany, Japan, the United States, and Britain, found themselves in a bizarre equilibrium. By 1945, the war had not ended in surrender, but in sheer exhaustion. Germany had conquered much of Europe, but had failed to crush the remaining Russian forces. Japan had taken control of vast territories, but was bogged down by rebellions and logistical challenges. The four powers came together for a final meeting in neutral Switzerland in 1945. Hitler, what was left of Stalin's government, Emperor Hirohito, Churchill, and Roosevelt all sat around a table. The conversation was awkward, with none of the leaders willing to admit defeat. Roosevelt finally spoke up. "Anyone want to admit they lost?" Silence filled the room. No one raised their hand. "Well then," Roosevelt said with a chuckle, "I guess we'll call this the status quo." By 1950, the world had settled into a Cold War-like competition between four superpowers: the United States in the Western Hemisphere, the German Empire controlling most of Europe, the Japanese co-prosperity sphere ruling half of Asia, and the British Commonwealth. A world transformed. The Cold War became a four-way rivalry, with each superpower seeking dominance in different spheres. America became the leader of the tech industry. Germany dominated space exploration. Britain remained the global financial hub, and Japan focused on efficient manufacturing and economic cooperation. As the 20th century progressed, the world continued to evolve. In the 1960s, all four powers were in a space race, competing for supremacy in space. America developed nuclear weapons in 1947, Germany followed in 1948, Britain in 1950, and Japan focused on biological weapons and advanced logistics. By 1985, Japan's empire began to fragment, struggling with its massive population imbalance. China, India, and Korea rebelled once again, pushing the empire to its breaking point. In the 1990s, Italy, which had remained neutral, finally earned respect and became the cultural capital of the world, known for its food and lifestyle. And in 2025, the world remained a strange place, four superpowers in constant competition, all with their unique strengths and weaknesses. A world that never was. This alternate history shows how a single decision, Emperor Hirohito calling off the attack on Pearl Harbor, could have dramatically altered the course of history. The world would not be defined by a two-power Cold War, but by a four-way struggle for dominance. In this timeline, Japan never embraced anime, America never became the global police, and Britain never gave up its financial empire. The world, instead, would be a place where wars were fought not with missiles, but with GDP growth and technological innovation. And sometimes the biggest changes in history come from what doesn't happen.